Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International as we enter our next round of the lower quarters. Right now we're going to be having No Girls Allowed squaring off against Paint for Femme. Joining me for all the action, we've got Zyronic, Nagura, and Tettles, and I'm Jack. Now let's talk a little bit about these teams' origins as we start getting into it. No Girls Allowed, of course, is a collection of gamer dads, and of course the... What was it?
Learn to fly.
Learn to fly. There we go. I was about to say fly me out. I was like, wait a minute.
It's close enough.
It's close enough. I know, so much flight in NA. You know, the bald eagles, all of our freedom.
Actually flying.
They're getting close enough. They're getting close enough as well. And then, of course, Paint for Femme, who, you know, Femme is quite the artist, and he's been working on a pretty special commission lately here. Since it's Zyronic's birthday, he wanted to be able to put something very special to him. So, happy birthday, Zyronic.
Happy birthday, Zyronic.
Very happy birthday to him.
Yeah.
Femme will get you the painting as well once he wins this next series or so, you know. We'll see.
I already got a really nice drawing on Twitter.
He has some excellent... Oh, that's right. There have been some excellent drawings for him. You love to see it.
But what if he loses? Is he not going to paint anything for Sarah?
That's going to be a close call. We're going to have to watch out for that. I mean, so going to that point, though, who do you think is going to be taking this series since you said they're so evenly matched, Nagura?
I don't know.
Oh, she knows the threat of...
I'm going to go for Paint for Femme because I'm from Europe anyway.
Because they're going to get into DMs and be like, why are you going against us?
Exactly.
Why are you going against us?
I'm going to get those angry messages again by Ricky and Femme.
You really can't have it onto this one. So, Trell's not breaking out the usual Brewmaster that we're seeing on this one, Tettles. What are you thinking about it in this matchup? That it's going to be more situational based? What do you think?
I do think it's actually situational. Trell has talked about it before. He plays Brewmaster where he believes it's the best tank, but at the end of the day, he's not going to hinder his team by being very hard-headed with playing the Brewmaster whenever. He just ends up playing it where he believes that it fits the best, and he believes that Prot Warrior fits the best for Toldagor, clearly.
Interesting on that one. So is it probably going to be more the damage, you think, Zyronic, of the warrior, or the burst damage that goes into it, or how much they're going to be able to move around, something like that as a monk?
I think the difference between Brewmaster and Warrior in terms of damage is not that big of a deal. I think Warrior does slightly more AoE damage, but Brewmaster gives the extra melee DPS like maybe 3% more damage because from their debuff versus, you know, they can just use attack power scrolls instead of the Warrior shout. So I don't think it's a damage thing, it's just a utility thing. If they want more utility, they'll run with the Brewmaster, because Trell's probably more comfortable on the Brewmaster. That's his main character on LAN. It's probably just comfort, honestly.
Interesting, okay. Oh, I wasn't sure what was going to be the difference, since you can use those battle scrolls to fill in for a warrior shout, but you can't replace Mystic Touch at all. So seeing how that damage would kind of start differing, and the next couple of rounds we'd have would be Toldagor, King's Rest, and then if we go into a Taldazar, we would go for that one in the game 3. And that was the one that Tettles we also voted for the affixes. So we saw some teams already with some very nasty Sanguine pulls coming up. You think it might go into game 3?
I mean, I think these teams are actually very close to one another. Kind of like what Nagura was saying in the like last segment. I think the teams are they match up very evenly. So I do expect a game 3 here.
Interesting, Zyro. You feel the same?
Yeah, I'm gonna say game 3. These teams are really evenly matched, and on top of that, like both of them are in the same spot, right? They're not that high up in the standings because they're both pretty much new teams. They really need to prove themselves this tournament going forward if they want to have any chance of making it to BlizzCon.
I think one of the things we've noticed a lot thus far, I mean, it can always change, but the dungeons that we've seen No Girls Allowed actually practice for, they've been excellent on, and they've been very consistent. Whereas it seems almost like Paint for Femme has been practicing a little bit of everything, and they kind of just have that little side chance of inconsistency onto it. So if it comes down to... I think if it comes down to No Girls Allowed actually being well practiced on all of the dungeons they have going forward, I think they might be having the extra opportunity to take this one. But chat certainly agrees that 75% for No Girls Allowed as we get started in game 1 here in Toldagor.
Unbelievable. Not believing in the Europeans. Well, Twitch said.
Nagura's got your number.
I'll talk to you later. Anyway, we are in Toldagor here. Now, we've seen Paint for Femme already play this dungeon before. They won against 40k, actually, but 40k had this huge wipe on the third boss. So, you know, you can't really say that Paint for Femme was playing that much better because they got their win basically handed to them. So we'll see what No Girls Allowed does here because we haven't seen them in this dungeon yet.
Yeah, and this is the first time I think we've seen this dungeon where we see teams actually doing similar strategies at the start, pulling a lot of these crabs into the boss with Bloodlust. It looks like Paint for Femme maybe has a little bit more. Looks like they have 2 crab packs versus the 1 for No Girls Allowed, so they're going to get a little more trash percentage. They're probably, well, they're also getting about the same boss damage too, so I can't say they're doing less boss damage because of it either. They're just getting a lot of Blade Flurry cleave in. But, I mean, one of the ones that I wanted to say coming into this is, like, you mentioned that 40k kind of threw that map against Paint for Femme, and one of the things we keep talking about moving forward in this tournament, it's been a very weird trend all weekend, is that every single time teams pull trash into bosses, doesn't seem to go very well for him. I feel like we had the first...
It'll going down.
Oh.
I think that's going to be a wipe.
That's a reset. I mean, they have to reset the boss. They're not going to kill this boss without a healer. That's a full-on wipe for No Girls Allowed right off the bat. And, I mean, maybe they can try to bleed this out. It is fortified. They might be able to kill the boss, but it's going to take them a lot more time, and it's going to be a lot less safe for them.
They also don't have the Soothe anymore, right? Because the Sand Queen actually gets an Enrage buff that stacks up once those drones die around the boss. So usually you have the Residuary just dispel it before a Sandstorm, so the Sandstorm does less damage, or before the Upheaval, so the Upheaval does less damage. But now you don't actually have the Soothe anymore. So it seems like they are trying to commit. And with the Rogues having the cloaks available for the Sandstorm, it should be alright. But we see none of the Rogues actually have their cloak ready. So we'll see how it goes for No Girls Allowed. The boss is dropping really fast, so maybe they're going to be able to finish this off. But Edelweiss, I believe she went down because there were just so many bursting stacks because they pulled some of the trash on top of the boss here, and they did not manage to control their damage properly, and Edelweiss just going down with all the bursting stacks on top of having the boss damage as well. One more Sandstorm. They seem pretty healthy. The Rogues, of course, having so much utility and defensives that they should be able to finish it off, and the Upheaval, of course, also can be dodged by Rogues with the Shadow Melt or the Vanish or the Shadow Step. You know, they have lots of things to dodge it, so they should be fine here to finish it up.
Okay, I might have called that wipe a little bit early, but yeah, they do have one extra death on the board, and they are 6% trash percentage behind, so it's not like that, you know, her dying there did them any favors, unfortunately, but, you know, props to them for actually being able to pull that off. Like you mentioned, they had none of their cloaks available, so any of those debuffs from the bugs got out of control. I don't remember what they're called. They're the ads on the fight. They would have been in pretty big trouble, but they're able to get through it and move on quickly. And both teams are pretty much at the same point of the dungeon because of that, with just, like we mentioned, slight advantage for Pain for Fem.
Yeah, so one more difference between Pain for Femme and No Girls Allowed. I mean, they're running the same setup, of course. We see 6 Rogues here. Wow, a lot of Rogues. But the difference between them is that Pain for Femme is actually running Dwarves. So all 3 Rogues are running Dwarf for Pain for Femme, while No Girls Allowed is running Night Elves on the Rogues as well. So they have 2 resets. They have Shadow Melt and they have the Vanish available to them, which is pretty good for Tolagor just because there's so many skips that you have to do, and you also want to open those cages on the side to get the buffs, and if you don't have Shadow Melt or Vanish available to you, then you're just going to be in combat with the mobs that are around there. So having this double safety net of getting out of combat might be something that No Girls Allowed chose to run, while Pain for Femme is going for more damage, as Femme actually goes down on one of those big pulls here. They do get their battle rest on Femme immediately, but they have to be careful here because these mobs actually do a lot of damage.
Yeah, and of course, with all of them at the same HP, they're going to get 5 stacks of bursting here, and that's going to be a lot of damage on the group. I don't think anyone will go down, but they're going to get incredibly low. Fortunately, not proccing cheat death on any of the Rogues, so they still have all of those available. That's just a little dangerous moment there, and now they don't have their battle res available, and No Girls Allowed still has theirs available, so they have that little advantage now. So teams are kind of neck and neck in terms of what advantage they have over the other team right now.
Yeah, and at this point, I mean, might as well just leave the healer somewhere behind, because we've seen that you don't actually need a healer at all if you have 3 Rogues available to you. So Edelweiss, just, you know, being a cat for doing some damage, because the Rogues, they're fine to stay alive. Pain for Femme, as you said, no battle rest available to them. And we talked about these C speakers before. Now, if you're a Horde and you have the Mass Dispel, the offensive dispel from the Blood Elf racial, then if a dome goes through, you can just use the Blood Elf racial, get rid of them immediately. It is an absorb shield that gets applied to all the mobs around it. But since they're both playing Alliance for No Girls Allowed and Pain for Femme, they don't have this Massive Spell available to them, and therefore they need to make sure they interrupt all those watery domes, else they're gonna have to damage through the shields, which just costs you so much time.
And we are seeing a little bit of a differing strategy here from the teams. No Girls Allowed opting to do a little bit more trash early on than Pain for Femme, so they might be doing a little bit less with the cannons. They're also opting to unlock all of the doors on this floor as well, so they get a little bit of extra mob count. Also, during the boss, the boss won't be able to free those prisoners during the boss encounter either, so the boss will be a little bit easier for them too. So a little bit interesting differing strategy there.
Yeah, we see Meva actually using that Tranquility here on this trash pack to be able to heal the bursting stacks away, and you also see the Emissary being avoided, just line of standing around the corner. And one thing we didn't mention yet is the explosive, right? Now, Rogues are usually very good at dealing with explosive, but Mabel actually not line of sighting them, and they already pulled the boss. this is a huge problem. They need to reset this boss. I don't think they can. Yeah, and Fam actually going down too. That was a huge mistake by their Rasta Druid here. We talked about the emissary being there, the Void, that's constantly casting this AoE, and we also saw some explosives spawning around the corner. Mavo did not line of sight properly, maybe because he was a little bit too late compared to the rest of the team, and just going down. And with them not having anyone who can rest him, and also not even having a battle rest available at all, they have to have a complete wipe and a reset, and they need to go again. This is going to cost them so much time.
I mean, that just seems like it was a little hiccup. Like, we haven't seen that many mistakes from Mio throughout this tournament. That's just like, I mean, I don't know, it's not early for them over there. It's like 6 p.m., so I'm not sure what the problem is. That's just forgot where they were in the dungeon at that point. I mean, part of the problem with Tol Dagor is it's such a small space. It feels like there's very little room to move around. So sometimes you forget that you can just move around the corner to line of sight most of these mechanics. You know, fortunately, because, you know, this is a vertical dungeon, it's not that big, you can pretty much res from anywhere, so they're not going to have that much of an issue getting back into it. I'm not quite sure what he's doing right now, and start casting res, buddy. But the only way you can reset that boss is if you run all the way around the side and pull the boss out the door. That's the only way they could have possibly gotten a reset, and like you mentioned, the Void Emissary was in the way of that. He tried resetting it. He's like, okay, I have to run all the way around, but he couldn't do it there. So they're going to be sitting there waiting. No Girls Alloud's moving on and clearing a lot more trash than Pain for Femme was here.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it might be a problem with Mavo not being able to skip past the trash here. Maybe he's waiting for his Shadow Melt CD to come off or something like that. But Pain for Femme definitely losing an insane amount of time here while No Girls Allowed already on their way. No Girls Allowed actually got a Watery Dome off here, so they didn't get the interrupt. So they have to like wait for it to drop off. But they're on their way to also engage Jess Hallis now. So No Girls Allowed having 50% trash to their name, and they also are fighting Jess Hallis at the same time. Now, on this 45 setting, Jess Hallis should not be a huge problem, but we've seen some teams struggle in the second phase when you have Bobby available as well, and then Bobby casting those spells that needs to be, those abilities that need to be interrupted as well. If you don't interrupt all of them, then if you get a fear through and you get the claws as well, then we can definitely see something happen, because it's still one shots you on 45, right? So if you don't interrupt, then no matter if it's tyrannical or 45, you're still gonna die.
Hey Jess, I believe they already released all those prisoners, man. That's not going to do much. You got to stop opening those doors. Yeah, I mean, we talked about this boss a lot. We see a lot of teams actually wiping to this boss. The last cup, where they had problems with explosive once all those prisoners were released, maybe that was why they decided to open those cages beforehand, so they didn't have any problems with explosives on this boss, because that's really the only thing that's going to wipe you. Now, of course, both Jess and Bobby have 2 casts each that you have to interrupt, and it's kind of difficult to deal with if you don't have the right comp, but fortunately for them, they do have 4 melee interrupts, so they should be able to get all the kicks. The main ones being those Howling Fears that will fear the entire group if they get off, so making sure they're getting those interrupts should be totally fine on this boss. And of course, like I mentioned yesterday, you know, the real champion is whoever does the most damage to Bobby.
I think he just casting Curse Pain for Femme. You said the interrupts shouldn't be a problem, and Pain for Femme had a fear going off on the whole group. Now, the problem is Shelly is dead, right? Shelly died on the very full. They don't have a battle rest available, so maybe they were short on interrupts or something like that, but a whole fear on the whole group went through. Fortunately for them, there were no Jagged Claws cast by Jess Howley, so they did not have a full team wipe going out, but they're still struggling a lot here. I'm not sure if they have mentality problems, if, you know, this wipe caused them to just, you know, tilt a little bit, play slower, but, you know, with one player that this fight is gonna take them a lot longer, so they're struggling here. Well, No Girls Allowed, they're down with Jess Howless at this point, and they're on the way to the cannon part. Now, one more thing I want to mention is that Pain for Femme actually changed up their strategy quite a bit to yesterday, because yesterday they were playing a lot of trash with the cannons compared to 40k that they were playing against. And I was questioning that strategy a little bit, because it seemed like the setup time for the cannon part just seemed way too long for the percentage that they're gaining from it. So maybe Pain for Femme agreed, and they're actually changing up their strategy to get a little bit more trash beforehand. But it seems like they are not very well practiced with this strategy, and therefore they're having these swipes and these problems.
Yeah, you know, that was definitely a very weird wipe from them, considering how well they've played this tournament so far. So hopefully it's not something that weighs on their mind too hard. This is a 3-game series, so they can definitely come back in games 2 and 3 if they were to lose this map, which it looks like they're going to be doing right now, as long as everything plays out clean from this point. Had a little bit of a hiccup there from No Girls Allowed, where it looked like they were trying to skip that the 2 mobs on that top floor there. They were sitting by the door all stealth, like waiting to go by, and then they turned around and killed the 2 mobs because they realized they were in combat with them. Definitely not what you want to be doing there, but they probably realize that they are ahead right now, and they decided to play it safe and kill those 2 off before they moved on to the cannon section of the dungeon.
Yeah, and we also see a setup here happening for No Girls Allowed for this cannon part. One thing to note that they are already on 61%, so they don't need to do as much trash as we've seen Pain for Fam, for example, do yesterday. Pain for Fam were doing this whole setup where they would wait a little bit, they would gather a lot of trash from inside the area too until they use the cannons, because as we know, the cannons only have 5 charges now compared to the spring season where they had unlimited charges. So you definitely cannot kill as much trash anymore with the cannons as you used to. And so most of the teams are choosing to just kill a lot more trash inside the area before getting to that cannon part, just because this whole setup time takes way too long. Now we see some of the bursting go off for No Girls Allowed, but not a problem for Edelweiss to heal it up.
All right, melee players that use axes, I'm gonna teach you something fun here. The new Diver's Folly axe that drops in the raid from Blackwater Behemoth, it has a little proc on it. It has a chance to proc, and it saves up a percentage of your damage and then releases it at the end of the proc. Something fun about this dungeon is if you have that weapon proc in this dungeon, and then you hop into the cannon and you shoot the cannon, that counts as part of that proc. Then you can then leave the cannon and explode the proc on top of all this trash. It works similar to the way Soul Capacitor used to work back in Hellfire Citadel, if you remember that trinket from back in the day. So a little bit of extra damage there. I'm not sure if they're actually playing around that, like if they're going in and they're AoEing trash until one of the rogues gets the proc and then they hop in the cannon. That could be like a little extra min-maxy thing, but just a little bit of extra information for something interesting about this dungeon.
I liked it a lot. That seems very smart. I hope one of those teams pulls it off and we can actually see it here. Now, Pain for Fam, they did manage to finish up just Howless. Shallow did manage to release and get back up. Actually, it seems like they used a battle rest because it got back up there. So they definitely are out of battle rests again. So Pain for Fam have to be very careful here. As I mean, even if they manage to catch up time-wise, I mean, there's a 9 death difference, which is 45 seconds. So an insane amount of time to come past for Pain for Fam here. While No Girls Allowed having a lot cleaner run compared to them. Only 1 death so far, which was of course Edelweiss that died on the very first boss, which could have been a disaster really. So No Girls Allowed recovering really well from this very early hiccup they had on the first boss, and good on them for being able to finish the boss without a healer at all.
Yeah, and of course this is an interesting part of the dungeon as well, because they don't actually need any mob count. They don't really need to pull these, so we see them actually completely skipping all that trash. They're probably going to try to shadow melt it off here as well. They only need 9% more trash, and as we know, all the trash near the last cannon should be enough to finish that off. It almost seems like they kind of over-pulled trash, but that being said, we have seen teams only use the cannon on the front pack here, near the second cannon, and they either tried to cleave the rest of it down with the boss, or they used their 2 remaining cannon shots and then like finished it off with AoE, both of which are just inefficient. So an interesting like variation on strategy from No Girls Allowed, just opting to completely skip it there.
Yeah, interesting. And they also still have their Bloodlust available, which I assume at this point they're going to save for the last boss, Korgus. Now again, on a fortified setting, and the last boss should not be a huge problem, but it can still cause trouble with the RNG involved, because those bursting stacks can be doubled. So if you're a little bit unlucky and the boss casts a couple of doubles in a row, it's just going to be so much damage on the group, and therefore just playing it a little bit safer and having this Bloodlust for the last boss, which is probably what No Girls Allowed chooses to do. And bursting and explosive not going to really affect the last boss either. The explosives are not going to be a lot, so it's going to be easy to deal with, and bursting of course not going to be happening at all on the last boss, so no problems there.
Yep, and of course, I mean, we've talked about this boss a lot, Night Captain Valeri. It's pretty much I'm not going to curse them. Well, I'm going to curse them again. It's pretty much a figured-out boss. All the mechanics are cyclical. Everyone does pretty much the same thing. They wait for the Cinder Flame to go off. They move the barrel out of the way of the Cinder Flame. Then they have plenty of time to move the barrels around as they please to stack them up afterwards. They're just going to ignore them at this point because the boss is dead. But at that point, it all resets. You're able to redo all of the mechanics, and it's pretty much just a single target encounter. I think that's why we saw 40k opt to try to cleave trash down with it, because there's really not that much going on there.
Yeah, and that's actually what Pain for Fam is doing right now. So they it seems like they like the strategy that 40k was doing yesterday, even though 40k did end up wiping on Captain Valeri, but it was a mistake that definitely can be solved, right? It was just the barrels not being carried around properly by 40k. So Pain for Fam definitely liked what they've seen from 40k, and just choosing to copy that strategy, basically pulling the last trash back here on top of Valeri. They do not use their Bloodlust here, which I believe if you're gonna pull trash on top of Valyria, I feel like it's very efficient to use the Bloodlust there, in my opinion. So I like that more that 40k did yesterday, because again, Korgos should not be a huge issue at all, and it's a single target Bloodlust that you're using. So I feel like, in my personal opinion, it should be more efficient to use it here. But Pain for Fam is playing it safer and save it for the last boss. But at this point, can it really play safe?
I mean, we're at the point in this dungeon where we pretty much say all eyes are on the healer, all eyes are on Edelweiss. All she has to do is make sure she doesn't go down here, and they should have this boss. But at the same time, we've seen a lot of teams in previous cups just have problems on this boss, especially the healers. This is a difficult boss to heal. There's a lot going on for them here. But that being said, it's a fortified, it's not tyrannical. They have Bloodlust. They'll be able to burn this boss down very quickly. So hopefully we shouldn't see any wipes coming out from them here.
We actually see a little bit a difference here in strategy from where Trell is standing, the tank is standing. Now, most of the time we see the tank actually stand on the stairs, but if you stand on the stairs, your vision is actually very impaired and you can barely see anything as a tank. We've seen some tanks actually get hit by the ignition just because it's so hard to see as a tank, because your camera is covered by this building that is there in the back. So maybe that's why No Girls Allowed actually chooses to have Trell stand in a different position, just so he gets better vision on the room. Now you see those bursting stacks go out. Now one thing that is good to note about having those triple rogues is you actually have those cloaks available to you in case you get doubles, right? So you can just relieve the healer just using that cloak to not get any damage, and then Edelweiss only has to worry about herself, which is very good as a healer. You all know if you only have to heal one person, which is yourself, especially as a Raster Druid, you do have a lot more self-healing if you play with this Life Bloom talent, and you're just going to roll your Life Bloom on yourself all the time. So definitely helpful to have those rogues on this boss.
Yeah, unfortunately for them, they haven't had a single double yet, and it looks like they're not going to get one as the boss decides to cast Cross Ignition instead of changing to the other Azurite rounds. So they will not be getting any doubles on this boss, which means Edelweiss has a easy time pumping out 18k single target, which is pretty reasonable, a little lower than some other healers. We've seen some do 22, 23k, but pretty clean run from No Girls Allowed.
No Girls Allowed, keeping their composure after an early death and finishing out that game, taking it to Pain for Fem. Very good job by them, and not getting phased by something that can be pretty tilting early on. When you get to the very first boss, you have a death. They had that faith in the vampiric speed there, Titles, and they pulled through.
Yeah, fortunately enough, Triple Rogue is actually pretty good at killing Sand Queen with the Prot Warrior. Just as long as the Prot Warrior doesn't actually end up needing a ton of healing, they should be okay, just because of Vampiric Speed, Grand Melee. Also, the Rogues actually don't ever really get hit by the upheaval, just because they're actually able to Shadow Meld, Vanish, and Cloak all the upheavals. So they have so many tools that they're actually able to use. Unfortunately for them, Paint for Fem was just a little bit ahead on Sand Queen, not only in terms of percent, but in terms of like just killing the boss quicker just because of Edel's damage. So that's going to be, that was actually pretty bad for them at the very beginning. But then just building off some mistakes that Paint for Fem made, No Girls Allowed was able to capitalize on the mistakes that they actually did have from the team Paint for Fem, and then they end up just doing Jess Hallis. They didn't end up having some like land speed record run here from No Girls Allowed. It wasn't like the fastest thing we've ever seen, but they were very consistent and they took it slow and steady, and they actually ended up using their cannon to deal with all of these trash really well too. Like we saw some stuff from Method NA yesterday, how they were using their cannon to pull like way bigger packs and stuff like that. But No Girls Allowed probably ended up seeing where Paint for Fem was just in that instance, and decided that it was more advantageous for them to just kind of take it piece by piece and just take it a little bit slower than otherwise they would have had to if Paint for Fem were in a better position.
Yeah, and at that point you're starting to even see how the gap closes just a little bit more near the very end, as they were just taking it slow, taking themselves pretty steady. But let's talk about the wipe for Paint for Fem there. We got a good MDT on that one?
Yeah, so we have another Method Dungeon Tools showing. So basically Paint for Fem was actually going to do an incredibly large pull where they end up running down the hallway with all of this trash. There's also a Void Emissary in this pack as well, as this is the Void heavy week. You can actually see it right here. 2 explosives end up actually spawning about like right here, and then their healer ends up standing like right on this X mark right here, and then he ends up getting killed by these 2 explosive orbs plus the Void Emissary whenever it does its cast that does AoE damage. So basically their healer needed to be actually running to about here to be line of sighting of all of that, but he ends up just getting caught. And so we can actually see that in the clip right here whenever we do show it. You see their healer, he swaps into cat form, he's going to be running down the hallway. You actually see all those explosives spawning plus the Void Emissary at the very back of the room. He takes a little bit of damage from the Void Emissary and then just gets instantly killed by those explosives. And then once that ends up happening, that pretty much seals the deal. Not only do they not have any battle reses, they have really no way of resetting the boss, plus like no engineering battle reses on the tournament realm, so they were in just a really bad spot for Paint for Femme here. Other than that though, if they were actually able to pull off that pull with Jess there, that would have actually put them in a really good spot to be able to take the dungeon, just because of how much count that does in fact end up giving, and they would have actually probably gone back and actually done the Void Emissary while Jess is doing that RP where he's like running down the corridor and everything else. That would have actually been very good for Paint for Femme.
And it seemed like such a silly mistake too. It's something you just space out for a second, because that was very obvious that he had to go around the corner, right? Maybe just thinking about something else, thinking ahead about the boss, what he has to do, and then just completely forgetting about the line of sight. It's just such an unfortunate mistake.
That's all it takes, is just one mistake to start wiping an entire group when there's so much on the line. And there's always going to be a lot of pressure and a lot of focus on what the healers are doing. So that'll take us into the game 2 on the King's Rest. So we're going to be taking a quick break. When we come back, we'll be jumping right in. Don't go anywhere, guys. It's Championship Sunday here as we're getting ourselves ready for Game 2 between No Girls Allowed and Paint for Femme on King's Rest. Let's get into it.
Yeah, so King's Rest, we've seen this before, and we've seen really fast runs as well. We saw Method and A do this insane pull with the mini boss at the very end, on top of some trash as well. So definitely huge pulls that we've seen before. Now let's see what Paint for Femme and No Girls Allowed have for us here.
Yeah, something Settles touched on a little bit after the previous King's Rest we saw is that we swapped this entire King's Rest from Tyrannical to Fortified, which vastly changes kind of the flow of the dungeon. We saw a lot of teams focusing on just pulling as much trash as possible together because it was not that empowered. Okay. It's Fortified now. Trash does more damage. Tank instantly goes down with Bloodlust. It just shows you right there with the changes. It's kind of crazy. Them showing off what I was talking about right away. That's not really what you want to see at the start of the dungeon, but I appreciate them helping me out with the explanation a little bit.
That was definitely a very difficult pull by Paint for Femme, but No Girls Allowed seem to be doing the exact same thing though. They are also pulling those 2 Guardians on top of having the Emissary. So what the plan is here is basically you want to pull everything and just do not line of sight the Void Emissary. You want to just tank through the Void Emissary, have it like use defensives and out heal it and nuke it down before you die to the AoE cast. And that's why Paint for Femme probably used the Bloodlust to be able to go through it. But Femme just either not using enough defensives or something else happened. But huge mistake again by Paint for Femme at the very start of the dungeon. I really hope that this Tollagor didn't affect their mentality too much and they can keep on going here.
Well, I wonder if that's kind of a change based off of what they know the times in the dungeon are going to be. Because we saw earlier that, a good King's Rest time on Fortified, well, we don't know if it was necessarily good yet, but we saw in our run earlier today that their King's Rest time was about 23 minutes, which is about 2 minutes faster than the tyrannical times we saw in the previous cup. So maybe that's just kind of a change they made so that they can make sure and guarantee they get 3 Bloodlusts in instead of just 2, just for timing purposes. But we see No Girls Allowed also using their Bloodlust right at the start of the dungeon in a pretty big pull, not quite all 4 packs, but they're pulling 3 of the packs at the start of the dungeon here.
Is it actually? Oh yeah, they're pulling 3 packs, or is it just 2?
I believe it's 3. There's one in the corner that they haven't pulled, and that's it.
Okay.
Oh, no, okay, they left 2 of the mobs as well. So they're splitting it in half, but this is still the 2 bigger packs.
It's definitely a huge pull if you think about Fortified, just because of those Witch Doctors, right? We've seen the teams before struggle on these packs as well, just because if you have 2 Witch Doctors in a pull, then you do not have enough interrupts to get rid of all the Deathly Chills. And the Deathly Chills just do so much damage to your tank, especially on Fortified. So once you run out of interrupts, you need to have a perfect rotation with your defensives as a tank, and also use your Spell Reflect properly to be able to not die to the Deathly Chill. And then on top of that, you also have the Shadow Bolt Volley. So you need to make sure that at least one of your interrupts is ready for the Shadow Bolt Volley, because the Deathly Chill might not wipe you immediately, because the tank might survive some of those casts going through. But if you have a Shadow Bolt Volley go through, then you're in like a lot bigger trouble than if a Deathly Chill goes through. So you definitely want to make sure that you have your interrupts timed properly.
It's important to mention that this King's Rest is Tides heavy, so we have more of those emissaries of the Tides in this dungeon than any other of the emissaries. And the problem with those Tides emissaries in these packs is that they make it so you can't CC any of the mobs, which means you can't get interrupts. So that Witch Doctor would be popping off with those Deathly Chill casts on the tank. And as we know, warriors don't mitigate magic damage very well. Fortunately, they had the Rogue go over and sap it at the start, keep it out of combat, so that it's just sitting there in the corner while they deal with this trash pretty easily.
Yeah, Painter Fam doing similar pulls here, where also you see the emissary being rooted here in the back to be able to avoid it. Basically, we see Mevo just constantly casting those entangling roots on top of this emissary. And again, having these witch doctors are the biggest problem in this group, as no girls allowed actually dropping really low. Dilemma proccing the cheat dap here and the bursting on top, so definitely having a little bit of trouble, but they managed to finish it off. And at this point, they are going to be fighting the first boss here. Now we saw Nerve actually dying earlier for Method NA when they did this exact same pull, where they pulled the Guardians on top of the Golden Serpent. So we'll see if No Girls Allowed is doing better here and actually keeps their tank alive.
And I believe our resident tank here, Sloot, mentioned that these suppression slams from the Guardians were changed in 8.2 to only target the tank. They don't target random directions now. So as long as Trell is making sure he doesn't target the rest of the group with those frontals, they should be totally fine on this pull. So that's one of the biggest problems with those. That's why teams weren't doing this before. In addition to it also being tyrannical, this is just kind of the new strategy. You don't want to stack more fortified trash on top of the already difficult gauntlet room, which is where they were doing that before.
Yeah, I like this a lot more. It seemed like Method NA definitely saved some time by doing this strategy, in opposed to what 40k did with the old strategy and pulling the Guardians into the gauntlet. Now, Painful Fam actually caught up quite a bit, considering that they had almost a full team wipe at the start. Of course, they only had 2 deaths, but it was the tank and the healer, so they had to have a full reset. The rogues did manage to de-aggro with probably Vanish to get off, but still, Painter Fam only 5% boss HP behind, and on a 45 setting, that's not a huge difference. Now, of course, No Girls Allowed also has those Guardians, which Painter Fam just did not pull on top of the boss, so they will have to deal with them later on into the gauntlet, as 40k did as well.
And just like what happened with Method NA, Troll did end up going down to the Guardians when they were about 10% HP there. They did instantly pop the battle res out for him, so it's not that big of a deal. They just don't have that for another 4 minutes or so. But I mean, that's kind of I think that's an okay trade-off, right? If you're not planning another battle reses, but there you go, right there, one rogue going down, probably to the dot. I mean, there's not much else to go down to on the fight.
I think it was the AOE that both Dilemma and Sistara got hit by.
That's just laziness. That's not what you want to see out of any of these DPS players. That's big DPS brain coming out from them there.
Unless they actually wanted to calculate it to increase their damage, to just take it, but then he got hit by something else on top of it and they died. Not sure.
Yeah, fortunately, the boss is at 20%, so they only have to do 2 DPS damage for the rest of the boss's HP. This would be really bad if they did it like 80%, but 20%, I think being able to cleave the constructs on top of the boss offsets the deaths, so they're not really going to fall too far behind because of that. They'll fall behind in terms of where they are in the dungeon, but because they got that extra trash percentage out, they're going to be pretty much neck and neck with Painful Fam at this point.
Yeah, and both of the teams now on 2 deaths. It seems like No Girls Allowed actually taking quite a while to finish off this boss here, though. So we'll see later on, once Painful Fam is pulling those Guardians through, as you can see right now on the left screen. Mabel went back, pulling those Guardians, so we'll see how Painful Fam deals with that. And I've talked about this in the earlier King's Rest. I do believe that pulling the Guardians on top of this gauntlet on 45 is actually very difficult, because you have those named mobs like the King Adal and so on that does so much tank damage, on top of also having very difficult mechanics to deal with, that it might be a problem. And if you make any sort of mistakes as a tank, or you don't interrupt one of those abilities from the next trash pack, then you can definitely have a full team wipe or have the tank go down.
Yeah, we'll have to see if them pulling the constructs into this fortified room here is actually going to slow them down more than it did for No Girls Allowed on the boss. Because like you mentioned, they're not going to be able to just fully focus down any of these trash packs because they have the Guardians here. This is more the tyrannical strategy. It makes sense to do it in tyrannical because this trash room, this gauntlet room, doesn't really do as much. But you got to remember, fortified, I believe it's 40% more damage, 20% more HP, or is it the other way around? It's something like that. It's at least 20% more, and one of them is a little bit more. But it's a lot more damage and health on these mobs in fortified, and this room is a lot more dangerous on fortified.
Yeah, it most definitely is. And you can see, especially this gauntlet here, this trash group on the bottom left. Now, one thing to note as well is that this gauntlet is actually RNG on which group gets activated each time. But on a tournament realm, we do have a stat rotation. It starts with the top left and then goes counterclockwise. So it will always be the same trash group that you are fighting while also having those Guardians. But it is this very difficult guard captain Alo that constantly casts this X barrage that needs to be interrupted. interrupted or line of sighted. And then we have King Rahu here that casts this lightning AoE that you've just seen that needs to be interrupted by either a Ring of Peace or a Typhoon. But none of these groups actually running the Windwalker, which by the way is very interesting because Pain for Femme does have a Windwalker main, Ricky. He's actually main Windwalker for a very long time, so not seeing the Windwalker here is weird because we've seen Method NA and both 40k run a Windwalker in this dungeon, but these teams seem to not value the Windwalker here at all.
And props to Pain for Femme where it's due. They managed to take the constructs down with little to no problem whatsoever. I felt that it would have slowed them down in this room a little bit more than it did, but they have the same deaths, they have the same mob count, and they're at half HP on this particular set of Guardians where No Girls Allowed just pulled them, so they're pretty firmly ahead. I mean, it's not that big of an advantage, maybe 15-20 seconds, but they are ahead.
Yeah, definitely. And this time around in King's Rest, I think King's Rest is a very straightforward dungeon where there's not that many variations in strategy that you can do. So at the end of the spring season, we've seen almost all of the teams do the exact same thing with very, very slight variations between strategies. So it was really just whoever is more efficient in damage and whoever makes less mistakes is going to win. But we've seen the King's Rest before between Method NA and 40k, and they had a lot of differences in strategies there because this time around, of course, we have the different mob count, which was changed, and we also have fortified instead of tyrannical. So on the bridge later on in this dungeon, we've seen Method NA be way faster compared to 40k. So anything can still happen here in this dungeon, even though No Girls Allowed is very slightly behind. They have lots of time to catch up later on in this dungeon still.
Yeah, it's really interesting talking about the dynamic between Tyrannical and Fortified in this dungeon because I think everyone kind of has the same opinion of King's Rest, where it's by far the most not mechanically difficult dungeon, but numbers-wise, it's one of the most difficult dungeons in BFA. And on Tyrannical, every single boss is a huge chunk of HP to get through. All the mechanics are incredibly dangerous. But on Fortified, all of the trash becomes incredibly dangerous, especially that bridge section. I mean, the bridge section is definitely going to make or break this dungeon. Everything up to the bridge is a lot easier than the bridge itself is, mainly because of those berserker mobs. But one of the big breakpoints we sometimes see as well is how teams pull this room. There are some teams that take this room a little bit more safe and they do the fluids in 2 packs at a time. But there are most teams that are fast in this dungeon are doing what Pain for Femme does right now, where they pull all of them at the exact same time and cleave everything down.
Yeah, one advantage here by having a triple rogue instead of having double rogue plus Windwalker is that you can have all the rogues stay while Mevo and the tank probably just going to run away here, but all the rogues, they can stay and finish off the mobs because they can just cloak away the bursting, right? As we can see right here for Pain for Femme, both Femme and Mevo just running away. They don't want to have anything to do with this bursting because the amount of fluids that are there would definitely make sure that Femme and Mevo would die. There's no amount of defensives you can use to survive those kind of stacks unless you have an immunity, of course, like the rogues do.
Yeah, both teams pulling that strat off exactly the same way, and then of course the other strategy we see here with the 2 internment constructs is that they'll pull them on top of each other on the same side of the room, but albeit a little bit pulled at different times so that the entombs don't go off at the same time, so they can just click the same sarcophagus to get people out at the same time, or right after each other, not at the same time. Another strategy going very well for them, and it looks like both teams also have 1 extra mob in there. Pain for Femme have one of the fluids that they missed, and No Girls Allowed have the other Tides Emissary that they missed.
Yeah, so they're going to be very, very even percentage-wise and also time-wise. I mean, look at the HP of those constructs. Both of those teams so close to one another, the exact same amount of deaths as well, and they both have their Bloodlust available right now. So we'll see what they do with their Bloodlust. 40k and Method NA had different strategies when it came to their Bloodlust usage, so we'll see what those kind of teams do. I don't think they're going to use it for this boss now, which is something we've seen in the spring season, but in the spring season we also had Tyrannical, so then it was more efficient to use. Now Girls Allowed actually pulling 1 more construct here, which I believe is a bridge construct that they got here. I'm not sure if it was a mistake that they didn't get out of combat with, or if it was on purpose.
No, I mean, there's no way you can get in combat with that. They used Shroud to get past it.
Yeah.
They should have been totally fine. They even distracted to the side. I watched them do it. This is new. This might be something that they pull so they don't have to deal with one of the Berserker packs in the bridge, which would be a pretty interesting strategy from them, because whenever we see trash whips in this dungeon, it's almost always to those Spectral Berserkers. That bleed that they put on anyone they're close to after they jump is a ridiculous amount of damage, and if you're not Dwarf or if you don't have some way to remove it, you're going to take almost your whole HP. And on top of that, they just pull it with the boss. It is fortified, but like you mentioned, we see a difference in Bloodlust usage. Pain for Femme opting to use hers on the Embalmer himself, and No Girls Allowed looks like they're saving it for one of those Berserker pulls, even though they have the extra trash percentage.
Yeah, so Pain for Femme probably heard me and they popped their Bloodlust just so I'm wrong, because I basically said they're not going to be using it for this boss because it is 45. It really does seem like not a very good usage though, in my opinion, because I mean, it is 45, and we talked about this bridge trash and how difficult it is with the Berserkers, with the Beastmasters, with so many casters that need to be interrupted. So having that Bloodlust makes the bridge part just so much easier. We're also having the mini-boss at the very end of the dungeon, which also is very difficult to deal with, which we've seen Method and A save their Bloodlust for. So just using this Bloodlust on Machimba seems like a weird strategy. Maybe they think they're gonna get one more Bloodlust out at the very end, so that's probably what they're thinking. But No Girls Allowed definitely saving their Bloodlust, probably for the trash on the bridge later.
Yeah, based off of the timing of the dungeon we saw earlier, Pain for Femme should get one more Bloodlust off. It'll be during the final boss, King Dazar, but I mean, that's not really an efficient use of Bloodlust in this dungeon, so I'm not sure why that matters to them too much. I mean, getting 2 Bloodlusts off on a single target versus 1 Bloodlust off for a very difficult AoE trash pack, I'd rather take the AoE trash pack, especially in King's Rest. We do see them shrouding past the first Berserker pack, which is like something you never really want to do at this point, especially on Fortified. They also go past the second trash pack as well, and I don't know if they're trying to get past the Brute too, just for a third one. Looks like they're pulling this pack. That's fine. The really difficult mob to look out here for is that Beastmaster. It'll do a large frontal AoE ability. If it hits anyone, it's just a nasty nature shot of them. And Miwo goes down, which is not what you want to see because they don't have a battle race. He has to run all the way back from the start of the dungeon. There's no checkpoints in this dungeon until you kill the third boss.
Yeah, and they didn't kill the bridge construct, which is something that No Girls Allowed did. Pain for Femme, not killing the bridge construct, that means that at the start of the dungeon you can talk to an NPC that will teleport you to that bridge area where the bridge construct usually is. But since they didn't kill it, it did not actually get unlocked, and therefore Mabel has to walk all the way down there. Now, Rastaries do have some ability with dash in cat form, but you can't go in travel form inside King's Rest at all, so it's still going to take him a while to get back. Now, Pain for Femme obviously do have to deal with this Brute, and that Brute should not be causing a lot of trouble as long as you don't get by the AoE, but still, it's going to cost them quite a while for Mayweather to come back here.
Now, this is really confusing out of No Girls Allowed. They had the extra trash percentage, but they didn't opt to skip this Berserker pack. They're going to have to skip something at this point, right? Because you have to think about further on in the dungeon. They have the guaranteed 4% trash count from Shadow of Zul, which is right before the final boss, which is a mandatory mini boss in order to open that final gate. So they only have 13% more trash percentage they're going to get, and they're sitting on their Bloodlust. So either they're gearing up for a big pull for the rest of the trash percentage here, or we're going to see something small. But another double pull on top of the emissary of the Tides here, popping their Bloodlust isn't going to be a big pull for them.
Okay, so I assume that No Girls Allowed is just going to kill up this trash, and then they're done. They're probably just going to skip the whole bridge area, which is not such a bad idea in my opinion, just because the bridge is so difficult and there's so many things that can go wrong. We saw 40k struggle so much with the bridge area as well, also having these emissaries in the bridge too. But popping that Bloodlust, you see the Healing Tide spawn in the corner, so it's not a problem here. They don't have to kill it off. They can just drag the mobs away. With Dilemma dropping very low, getting that Frost Shock on him, but he used that Cloak just to be safe here. Now, the Brute is the one with the most HP here, but it's not actually the most difficult mob. It's really the Beastmaster that they have to be careful about, especially because of the Dead Eye and this AoE cone with the Poison debuff. Now, on top of the Brute, with having this huge area of denial, having the Beastmaster cast all those frontals can cause problems, but No Girls Allowed seem to be dealing with it pretty well.
Question is, does this get them to 96%? I think it should. It'll get them very close if not. And then, like you mentioned, they can just skip everything. Go to the boss, go boss, Shadow of Zul, boss. Yeah, it'll definitely get them to 96%. I like that. And on top of that, like you mentioned as well, I believe, the blind on the Beastmaster, which is kind of a nasty mob to deal with when you're aiming all that trash back on top of it. You don't want to have someone have to go out and make sure that they don't hit the entire group with that poison barrage. So keeping that blound, as I like to say, definitely a smart play. We're going to see them skip these 2 Berserkers as well. You don't want to deal with the Berserkers is also them dealing with that first one makes total sense, and they're going to get to the boss way before Pain for Femme. Now, I think Miwo going down also helped with that a little bit. I think they'd probably be getting here at the same time, even with the differing strategies. But I like the strategy from No Girls Allowed. This is pretty impressive from them.
Yeah, it looked really good, to be honest. I'm a little bit like the strategy that Pain for Femme is doing here. It seemed like they were doing the exact same percentage. They were on the same percentage for trash once No Girl Allowed did their Bloodlust pull, but then Pain for Femme just fell behind because they're doing those weird 2 kind of pulls. to get their percentage here. And it definitely seems like they're going to go over percentage because they are 95% now. They still have this Witch Doctor and just Berserker here. So I'm not sure if they were miscalculating the percentage at all, but they're going to go over. So this seems like a very weird thing for Pain for Femme to do. Maybe they had to recalculate their strategy on the go or something like that, but something went wrong here as they go over percentage. Now, No Girls Allowed already done with their first boss in this council fight. So again, this council fight got nerfed because the Severing Action Kula does less damage on a player now, but it's also a 45 setting, so it's just in general easier.
I mean, this was a total gauntlet of a boss before. This was something that took teams maybe 4 or 5 minutes to get through before, but nowadays on Fortified, it should only take them 2.5 minutes to get through, and they don't have to commit that much to it. Like we mentioned, the biggest part of this boss was getting through that Kula just fine without losing any players or having to use too many defensive cooldowns. Of course, once you get through Kula, you don't have to deal with any more Severing Blades. The only thing to look for is that explosive totem on Xanazal, which is going to go off, it looks like. Yeah, it just goes off. It doesn't do that much damage on Fortified, I guess. So
and Cloak.
Joke's on me, I guess. Haha, dumb caster.
It actually did quite a bit of damage, but you saw all the rogues pop their Cloak. Edelweiss used Iron Bark on herself, Bark Skin on herself, and went into bear form. Just basically, it was kind of a smart strategy. I like this by just basically making use of the rogue utility by not having to go there, wasting the damage into the explosive totem. Just use your defensives, right, and live through it. So very well done by No Girls Allowed here.
That's always a good strategy. Just live forehead. That's what I always say. They're on to the final boss, of course, Akal Ali here, and I'm interested to see if they're going to do the strategy where we saw Team D kind of implement where you vanish off all of the charges. Of course, they just eat the first one in the face, so they're not going to do that. Of course, the benefit to that would be your tank can stay in for the entire duration of debilitating backhand, which is a debuff that makes the tank take more damage from the boss while he has it. Of course, it's also blockable, so, you know, you could just not get hit by it. Again, don't get hit forehead. And, and just stay in and deal damage. Looks like he did there because he didn't really worry about kiting the boss around, which is what we normally see here. Sistar opting to repost the charge through there as well, the barrel through, so no problems there as well. This boss, I mean, on Fortified, these bosses, you know, pose a lot less of a threat than they used to.
Most definitely. We see Trell actually not blocking the debuff here in the back end. As you can see, the debuff displayed on the groove frames here. We also have, of course, a new addition on the groove frame, or below the groove frames rather. You can see the defensive and the offensive cooldowns for each player here displayed, and you can see if it's being used or not. So that's definitely cool to see. You can keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on when the healer is using Tranquility, for example, whenever the tank is using their defensives. Now, Pain for Femme on Xanazal, so they still have one more boss to go right after this. Now, they're on 100% trash, right? So, unfortunately, there's no way to skip the last mini-boss, so they're just going to be over. While No Girls Allowed, they have this 4%, which is the exact percentage that Shadow of Zul gives.
Yeah, and of course, it has to be said that sometimes on the tournament realm, for some reason, some unknown reason, Shadow of Zul sometimes doesn't give the percentage that he's supposed to, which is that 4%. All of the players have been made aware of this and have been made aware that it does count, even if it doesn't show up in the sidebar. So if that happens, you guys know that in Twitch chat now as well. But to talk about Shadow of Zul himself, he does a lot of tank damage, especially on Fortified. You see Trell getting absolutely chunked. Pro Warriors really don't have that much mitigation against shadow damage, and the cool thing, I mean, this is something new today, I believe, is that when we're zoned in on this Rested Druid, you can actually see their HOTS on the player frames in the top, which is a pretty new addition, pretty cool. You can see how much Edelweiss is actually just pumping into the tank here. He needs a lot of healing on this pack.
And you can see Edelweiss just using all the HOTS available to her just to increase the mastery healing. Of course, mastery of a Rested, the more HOTS you have on a target, the more healing you do to that target. Therefore, Edelweiss is using all those HOTS, like the Fluorescence on the floor to get the Spring Blossoms, Rejuvenation, Regrowth, Life, and of course all the HOTS available to her just to get Trell, or to keep Trell alive. Also using all of the defenses. You can see the Shield Wall on cooldown, Last Stand, Iron Bulk, everything being used just to be able to survive this mini boss here.
And like we mentioned as well, they are at 100% trash count. They did finish off Shadow of Zul and get that percentage. So all they do need to do now is finish off King Dazar, and they're done with the dungeon. Pain for Femme still has to deal with Shadow of Zul. And they do have one slight advantage for them in that they have their Bloodlust coming off cooldown here, but I mean, they're so far behind. It would require a wipe from No Girls Allowed for them to come back in this dungeon right now.
Yeah, the only thing I was thinking was maybe Pain for Femme found out a way to skip this mini boss and still be able to access the last boss. That's the only thing I could have imagined for them to get the 100% before reaching this boss fight, right? Which, of course, there's no way, because there's a gate that you cannot access until the mini boss dies. But I figured maybe there's some smart mechanic that they figured out, but definitely not, as they're fighting Shadow of Su right now, and they're just gonna go over percentage. You see the Llama actually dropping very low for No Girls Allowed, but they do have 2 battle rests available to them, so even if something goes wrong, they can still just get them back up.
Yeah, fortunately no cheat death proc from him there, so he'll have that one for the nastier second mob that comes here in a second. Yeah, I'm not really sure how they would be able to go past the gate. That probably requires some clever use of game mechanics out of them. But of course, the more dangerous section of the counter, probably the most dangerous section of the counter, is T'Zala here, where T'Zala will cast Deathly Roar, which fears everyone on the group for 4 seconds, and the rogues are able to cloak the first one so they can just DPS through it, but if that second one gets off, everyone will be feared, and they'll just kind of be sitting ducks for 4 seconds, hoping that they don't tick down to anything happening. For instance, you know, Rebon could jump on one of the rogues and just cleave him down while he's feared, and there's nothing you can really do to that. Fortunately, no bad lineup. They're able to kill it before the second Deathly Roar, and at this point it's just a single target encounter where the boss doesn't really do much. As long as you're dodging these Gale Slashes and you're not getting hit by any of the spears, you're good to go.
They're not dodging them though. I feel bad for Edelweiss because, you know, on this boss there's not that much AoE happening, especially in 45. So in theory you can just, you know, go cat form, do as much damage as possible. But if your damage dealers get hit by those Gale Slashes and have the debuff on them, this nasty dot that he actually needs to be out healed, then you gotta switch out of cat form, throw some hots, just because, you know, damage dealer brain, they're not able to dodge it. But Edelweiss, of course, still doing a lot of damage, even though she does have to heal those rogues getting hit by the Gale Slashes. And King Nassar is about to go down here, is in the very last phase. The only other mechanic added here, of course, are those spears that need to be dodged, but not a problem at all for No Girls Allowed. And once they finish this boss, they're going to be 2-0ing Pain for Femme. It's not as close as I thought it would be. Pain for Femme definitely struggling against No Girls Allowed here.
Definitely not a great performance from Pain for Femme from what we saw from them earlier in the tournament. I mean, hopefully we'll see them back in future weeks, because where they showed brilliance, they were a really good team to watch.
Yeah.
And No Girls Allowed taking that quick 2-0 victory over Pain for Femme. And as you guys mentioned, we've seen Pain for Femme and a lot of their players throughout MDI, and you definitely want to be seeing them back even though they've been eliminated thus far. But No Girls Allowed, credit where it's due, that gamer dads and fly. Learn to fly. There we go. I nailed it. I know. There's so much flight going on in America, so much freedom.